But I, remembering, pitied well, and I loved them who with lonely light in empty infinite spaces dwell. Disconsolate for all the night, I heard the thin gnat voices cry, star to faint star across the sky.
Den interplanetære podcasten. Utforskning av rom til fordel for hele menneskeheten. Dine verter i England og Norge, Matthew Russell og Chris Carney.
Oh yeah, baby, Brooke.
Ah, yes. Did you used to watch Brookside?
I did. I was also in Brookside. The stuff of legend is that I played a dead body, which it was one of those weird things where my agent initially said you're going to play the dead body of Clint, who was one of the characters who got killed. And when I arrived, I was actually playing somebody who walks past his girlfriend and looks a bit like Clint. So they'd misunderstood it. But I'd told like maybe a few people that I was doing the dead body. And it just became folklore. Everybody would always say, didn't you play a dead body on Brookside? And I'd try and explain. And then eventually I started just going, yeah. So I was, and my first ever extra job was on Brookside. And that's when I discovered that in the early days of being in front of camera, as soon as someone shouted action, my entire neck would freeze up.
Your neck?
Yeah, my whole neck and my shoulders would go up.
Is that why they wanted you to play a dead body?
That was it, because my acting was so stiff.
Oh, wow. I didn't know you were in Brookside, just in case listeners thought that was a big setup.
No, yeah, that's another lifetime, that one though, Matthew. I was, being an extra, and then you eventually, you have to stop being an extra because you won't get considered for roles if you're appearing in the show too much, but it did give me a good industry knowledge, and then, I started auditioning for it. I never got a part, but, I did a few bit parts here and there. Dead Body was the most famous one though.
Well, that's very good, but it's got nothing to do with Brookside, Rupert Brooke. He's actually an English war poet.
Mm.
Do you know how the Irish poet W.B. Yeats described him? Was it Yeats? Is it W.B. Yeats?
It's Yeats. W.B. Yeats.
The Yeats.
W.B. Yeats. He described him as the handsomest young man in England.
Ooh. Imagine that, the handsomest. Yeah. But
you weren't born yet, though, Matt.
No, I was nowhere near born at that point. That's why. Did you hear that line? I heard the thin gnat voices cry.
Yes.
What's ironic about that is Rupert Brooke died of a mosquito bite getting infected.
Oh my!
While he was in the Navy.
So prophetic.
Why the heck are we talking about Rupert Brooke and this poem?
I know, yeah.
The poem appears in a book that we'll talk about later on, but it's a poem about the outward urge.
Oh, I've had a few of them.
Is the desire to travel further into space. The outward urge.
Yeah, I haven't had that.
You must have had the outward urge.
You used to get an occasional one in class, when the teacher used to get you up to go to the blackboard. You always seem to have an outward urge at that moment.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Or when the cameras start rolling, your neck gets an outward urge. Oh, so do you know what's special about this month?
Well, Matt, is there life on Mars?
It is Mars month. Because, of course, do you know what planet the month of March is named after?
Saturn.
Yes, correct. Pluto. No, it's of course. Both March and Mars are both named after the god of war.
One of my favourite gods.
March, of course, was the start of the war season. Which I thought was quite weird that there's a season for
That's
it.
Great.
Yeah. Oh, it's about time for war, isn't it? Yeah. War season.
Yeah. War season comes early this year. I've just bought some new armour.
Warmer armour. Got to start the season earlier and finish later.
Yeah.
I've got. Before we start Mars Month, which of course joins Women's History Month and National Nutrition Month in Canada.
Yeah.
Before we start Mars Month, just want to tell you that the interview today is with none other than Mr. Eric Berger, who, as I told Eric, is our most popular guest by quite a country mile. He people love him because
We love him.
I think Eric is Mr. New Space. He's Mr. New Space, isn't he? He's the person that people turn to hear about what the heck's happening with Elon Musk. And he's written a book called Liftoff, and that's the reason why I spoke to him. But I spoke to him a little bit about Mars as well and how we're going to get there, which of course involves pretty much SpaceX. So it's out this week in all good bookshops. Eric Berger's Liftoff. I'm almost at the end myself. It's a rip-roaring read.
Do you know if it's available on the Audible?
It is.
Fantastic.
Eric goes into this. Eric has chosen someone to do the Audible version. Yeah, so that it will be available because Eric himself is a Mr. Audible, just like myself. So that's great news.
Yes, I am. It's helped me to actually.
Version
well, it's actually helped me because I just don't read books anymore. It's terrible. Like I'm sure there's a few people out there who will also empathize. Like my brain does not have the capacity to pick up a book anymore. So audiobooks have saved my reading career, hobby.
Yeah, well, I actually find Audible books harder to follow than when I'm reading, if I'm honest, particularly non-fiction. But the reason why I love audio books is because I spend up to 5,000 hours a week looking at Zoom these days. And if I'm not looking at Zoom, I'm looking at some editing screen, editing down some piece of audio.
Yeah.
Like this one.
This particular one.
So yeah, that's why I love audiobooks. We need to talk about Mars. We need to get on with this Mars nonsense. Otherwise,
yes,
we won't have fulfilled Mars month.
And we need to do that.
Today's episode is sort of about Mars and why we think about Mars as this destination, and we'll finish off with all the missions that have been to Mars so far.
Yeah.
I thought it was a good place to start Mars month. So really, the beginning of humans' kind of fascination with Mars as a place to go is wrapped up with two Percys and a Schiaparelli.
Two Percys and a Schiaparelli walk into a bar.
So it actually makes me think that Perseverance is actually a really good name because there's quite a lot of Percys in this story. So
levels.
I'm going to start with Giovanni Virginio Schiaparelli, who was born in what month, do you think?
I think it's an appropriate month that he was born.
Yeah.
Is it March?
He's only born in March, isn't he, Schiaparelli? How appropriate is that? 14th, 1835. I think that he's the person that really does most to kickstart, everyone's obsession with Mars, really. And so he studied at the University of Turin, and graduated in 1854, worked at Berlin Observatory, then the Pulkovo Observatory near St. Petersburg, but then worked for 40 years at the Brera Observatory in Milan. And it's there that he started mapping Mars, and really sort of drawing Mars in detail and naming the Martian seas and continents with historical and mythological sources. And so he kind of brings it all alive. But the one word that he chose for sort of lines across the surface that he was seeing was canali, which means channels. He could see these channels going across Mars and he was drawing them.
Yeah.
And of course, to the English-speaking world, what do you think canali ends up getting translated into?
They all thought it was full of gondolas, didn't they?
Exactly. Aliens gondolizing down the canals. I think gondolizing is the correct
verb. Think it is. Yeah, that's the verb. Yeah, to gondol.
To gondolize. so, or is it punt? Or is that the English punt is the English for gondolize, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Which, of course, canals implies that there's intelligent life, right? It's someone's building canals on Mars.
But I don't know if it does say, intelligent life, because there's a lot of canals in Birmingham.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Well, that's a very good point, because the canals of Birmingham, of course, Birmingham really was the centre of modernity. The world's modernity started really in Birmingham in England.
Yeah.
You could make that case for it, you know. Even Benjamin Franklin used to visit to the Moon Society. Bear in mind that the Suez Canal had been built as well. And the Suez Canal was the great engineering project of the day. So to see these great engineering projects on Mars was definitely the zeitgeist as well. Yeah, and Schiaparelli went on to write a book in 1893 called La vita sul pianeta Marte. Pianeta Marte, which means life on Mars.
Oh.
I prefer the Italian pronunciation, though.
Yeah, but I prefer the Bowie song. Like, so.
Yeah, you could probably work out how an Italian Bowie cover version might sound.
Yeah, it'd be a bit of a longer.
La vita sal piene tormate.
It works.
Schiaparelli has made everyone sort of perk their ears up somewhat, and everyone's woo-hoo-hoo, something's going on. But there's a Percy over in America, born exactly 20 years after Schiaparelli, literally exactly 20 years. So what month was he born in?
It must be the month of March.
Yeah. So Percy Lowell, not to be confused with Lovell.
Right.
Percy Lowell, he was born 20 years after Schiaparelli, and he was a very rich businessman who was also extremely interested in astronomy and built the huge observatory in Flagstaff. Now, it was one of the greatest observatories of its day, and it's still in use today. And it was named in 2011 as one of the most important places on Earth, top 100 by Time magazine.
Where did it come?
Oh, I don't know actually. It's just in the top 100, maybe
Still,
99.
Yeah. Even if it is 99, even if it's 100, it's the top 100. You know,
probably down to the fact that it discovered Pluto. But I think it's probably also to do with the canals as well, because Percy Lowell was obsessed with the canals, and he mapped hundreds of them.
Yeah,
making up the stories that these straight lines were created by intelligent Martians to carry water from the polar caps down to the equatorial regions. That's what he was saying they were there for.
Yeah.
And a couple of years after Schiaparelli, he published his first book on Mars with loads of illustrations and all the canals. But one of the funny things is he was probably just drawing the veins in his own eyes. Percy Lowell just basically ran with Schiaparelli's idea and made it even more of a thing. Schiaparelli himself never went down the canal thing.
No.
Down the canal road. He thought that there was vegetation and stuff on Mars, but he never went down that they were canals. So Schiaparelli did try to point out that what he meant was channels of, maybe not even that deep, which may be where rivers ran, for example.
Yeah.
Which, of course, he might not be wrong at all about that. So there's yet another Percy that then steps in here, which I think is probably really, really important. And I've never heard of this, and I don't know whether you have. There's a chap called Percy Gregg, and he wrote a book called Across the Zodiac. Have you ever heard of that?
I have not heard of Across the Zodiac, no.
Not only is it one of the very first books that talks about going to Mars and detail the flight to Mars, but it also talks about anti-gravity as a method of getting there.
Yeah.
It's most famous because the spaceship itself is called the Astronaut. And that might be the very first use of the word astronaut.
Wow. Okay, well, yeah, I'm locked in now. I want to read this.
Yeah, well, not only that, so it doesn't stop there. So it's also the first book that really invents its own art language, which the aliens speak, which is very similar to obviously what Star Trek, I should say, did with Klingon, for example. It's like that. So it's one of the very first books to have its own art language, Artlang as it's called.
Yeah.
But it also is considered the first of these space novels called Sword and Planet, which is a subgenre of sci-fi. Sword and Planet were very, very popular books, and it often had sort of human-like beings fighting with swords on an alien world with wizards and stuff like that. Now, what does that sound like to you?
Might be a little bit like something that happened in a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
It really is influential, because I often think, why have they got lightsabers in Star Wars? And I guess it's inherited this Sword and Planet subgenre, and I'd never ever knew that before. And certainly I'd never heard Across the Zodiac, and I'd not really made that sort of lineage ever before. So imagine how important that book is. It uses the word astronaut.
Yeah.
It sets the stage for Star Wars. It sets the stage for bits of Star Trek, and it's one of the first books to really talk about going to Mars.
Absolutely incredible. So do you think this could genuinely be in the libraries of the likes of Lucas and the Star Trek creators?
Oh, that one must be, yeah. I think Percy Gregg's Across the Zodiac would definitely. I bet Lucas has got a first edition.
Yeah.
It'd be very interesting to find that out, actually.
Definitely.
Whether Lucas ever talks about that particular book. But I thought we'd have a quick run through of some of these books that people were writing. They were so inspired, and really these books, if you think about people like Carl Sagan, what actually, and Arthur C. Clarke and people like that, what made them want to go into science and go into space and out into the solar system and go to Mars? What is it that made those people so interested? And it's these books.
Yeah.
So these books, they really influenced, the people that went out into space. Eventually did go out and send, robots out into space, and some of them actually went to, I guess, some of the people that went to the moon probably read these books. So I thought I'd read out some of the big hitters.
Yeah, go for it.
Was very, very old, this Percy Gregg's. Quite a lot later, round about the time of Schiaparelli's book about Mars and vegetation and stuff, is called A Plunge into Space by Robert Cromie.
Plunge. I like the word plunge.
This is about a chap called Henry Barnett who learns how to combine electricity and gravity, which permeates all material things, a bit like the Force, I suppose. And he builds a globular spaceship called the Steel Globe, and they travel to Mars.
Fantastic.
And where they have a free society. Yeah, a lot of these Mars books get sort of intermingled as well with what's going on politically at the time. For example, Unveiling a Parallel by Alice Jones and Ella Merchant. So this was a 1893, a utopian feminist novel using Mars as a kind of trope to get this across, and it does actually look really fascinating what they've done. It's a really fascinating insight about feminism from that era as well. It's really bizarre because they travel. And the narrator, who's nameless, travels to Mars in an aeroplane, and that's apparently one of the very first uses of the word aeroplane as well. It had been used in the French, but never in the English. So yeah, it's one of the first uses of the word aeroplane. And they go to two different Mars societies where men and women are equal, but in different ways. So in one of them, the women have become have just basically adopted all the terrible things that men do, like go to prostitutes and stuff like that, and they've just basically just like men and behave like men.
Why should men have all the fun?
Palaveria, the women all behave like men, and so that's how they become evil. Evil. That's how they become equal. Well, I suppose it is a little bit evil. And in Caskia, the other place, they have gender equality because everyone is kind, loving, and generous to each other. And it's about, which of those two societies would you prefer? So yeah, it's that sounds pretty interesting, doesn't it?
Very ahead of its time.
Journey to Mars by Gustavus W. Pope is a very influential book as well. So that and I love this. The reason why the Martian what you see aren't canals at all; they're linear cities, and the reason why they have these thin cities is because they're being bombarded by meteors all the time, and it makes them thinner targets.
Right. Well, I like it.
So
I'm
not quite sure.
A lot of sort of insight into, so much thought goes into how the entire, the entire form of the planet works and everything. It's incredible.
Yeah, but it's a bit weird because presumably if the surface area of the city is the same, it's the chances are just as likely to get hit by meteors. I don't really understand that. So there we go. Have you ever heard of this book, though?
Oh, I don't know.
You might not have done. The War of the Worlds by a chap called H.G. Wells.
Yeah, every time I do that, I sound like I'm doing the theme tune for 999. Remember that? That's it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
How ace is Richard Burton on that?
Yeah, incredible. Absolutely amazing.
Oh my gosh. I'd get Richard Burton to narrate on anything.
Definitely.
Obviously, there's no point going into War of the Worlds because that's an obvious uber classic.
Yeah.
And, made super famous by, what's his name? Orson Welles.
Orson Welles, yeah. Terrifying everybody.
Yeah, they spell their name differently, which I'd never noticed before. I've always been confused about H.G. Wells and Orson Welles because of that and War of the Worlds and how confusing it all is.
Yeah, too many Wells.
Well. Three
well.
holes in the ground. Weird book that's after that is Edison's Conquest of Mars, which is a book written by Garrett P. Service, which is a sequel, apparently, to War of the Worlds, a sort of unauthorized version where he has Edison, the real Edison, who also hadn't authorized this, who then goes to Mars to reap revenge on the Martians. So Edison, on all his engineering skill, builds spaceships and weapons and goes and kicks the Martians' asses. Mars arse, as they say.
Isn't it ironic now that it's more likely that it'll be Tesla that gets there?
Oh. Wow, that is quite funny, isn't it?
Yeah.
Although I've never ever bought into the Tesla Edison being enemies argument. I'm sure it's
watched the film. There was a recent movie, and it was spirit crushingly dull. Unfortunately.
Yeah, I find the whole Edison Tesla thing a little bit dull because it just reeks of they were both pretty narcissistic anyway. It's not just the Americans and the British getting in on this. Red Star is a massive book by Alexander Bogdanov. It imagines, of course, Mars being a socialist utopia.
Oh, wow, did they come into that one?
Quite literally the red planet.
Yeah.
Then, of course, Edgar Rice Burroughs is huge for his Princess of Mars and all the other Mars stories that he wrote. Now, I've never heard of this one, but I've definitely heard of the writer. Alita. Have you ever heard of that? Alita, Aelita, 1952.
Alita. Right, okay.
Alita by Tolstoy.
Yeah, okay.
Arguably one of the greatest writers of all time.
I've heard of him.
Yeah, and it's one of the first Soviet science fiction novels. Obviously a lot later than Alexander Bogdanov's, but so he has this engineer, Mstislav Sergeyevich Loslos, who constructs a revolutionary pulse detonation rocket called the Stellarium. Wow. And flies over to Mars.
Isn't Stellarium a fantastic word? I mean, it's such a shame that's not used more. Stellarium.
Yeah. Well, and it's not it's not unreasonable to have pulse detonation as well.
No.
That's pretty cutting edge. Tolstoy is obviously onto something there. Now, we've also got an enormous writer here, C.S. Lewis, Out of the Silent Planet, which I have heard of.
Oh, I haven't. I'm terrible. I haven't heard of any of these.
You haven't heard of Out of the Silent Planet? I think one of the reasons why I've heard Out of the Silent Planet is because a lot of bands use it as an album title as well.
He's a little bit more, C.S. Lewis, a bit more religiously motivated, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So he's sort of saying, oh, there's probably, a bit more of a metaphysical thing going on here. So yeah, he talks about the Earth has been flung out of the solar system, as in everyone has ostracized Earth because it's been taken over by an angelic being known as Bent Oyarsa.
Oh.
And the rest of the solar system, the field of Arbol, knows the Earth as the silent planet because it's been, cast out. And Mars is called Malacandra in the book. Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah.
Well, I like it.
Yeah,
it brings to mind that sort of, like obviously when you've got your original sort of realization that we're not the center of the solar system and the universe, and then when these things start to boom about life on the other planet, with the religious sort of implication is quite interesting, because I would imagine there'd be a bit of pushback from those on this planet who believe that we are the only and chosen ones. It's
well, exactly. When Schiaparelli, I mean, that's such an ace point. When Schiaparelli looked at Mars and he's suggesting that there's life there, and maybe intelligent life, then yeah, of course, imagine you go, the Earth has been made in God's image and all those sort of thoughts. And it's like, well, what about those guys? Do they have the same God?
Yeah, exactly.
And then, it's so many things that sort of come out of, well, that's why Mars is so important, isn't it? It holds so many kind of mysteries about what it is to be human.
Yeah, their current mission, Perseverance, that discovery would be absolutely astonishing. I mean, we know it would anyway, but yeah.
Oh my God, it doesn't even bear thinking about. But we'll get onto that in a second. Percy being the last of the ones that get there, but couple more books before we get to what essentially ends that kind of fiction, because suddenly Mars becomes science fact.
Yeah.
When we get to Mariner. But there's a couple more books. There's Project Mars, which is by Werner von Braun. And Werner! And it's a novel about a human mission to Mars and the encounter with Martians on the planet. But it includes the technical spec of how to do this expedition to Mars.
Well, if anyone was going to write it.
Yeah. But it wasn't published until 2006.
Wow.
This was written in 1949, but then didn't get published. And I haven't read it. I must get Project Mars.
Yeah, definitely.
Got Ray Bradbury is pretty big. The Martian Chronicles, of course, huge, made into films. But the quote came from The Outward Urge by John Wyndham. John Wyndham being one of my favourite sci-fi writers.
Yeah.
These sort of, you had to read his books growing up in this country as part of your school education.
Yeah.
And The Midwich Cuckoos is great. That is a great book, and the Chrysalids and all that. But yes, and of course the Triffids. That's quite good as well, isn't it?
Yes.
They're the Triffids. Yes, he describes quite a realistic Mars landing in his book, The Outward Urge. But The Outward Urge is about a family, and it sort of skips generations through the family who've got this bug, this outward urge to go out into space, and it sort of follows this family as they are in different parts of history. So it's set from 1994 to 2194, so over 200 years, and looks every 50-year intervals. And so there's a space station in Earth orbit in the 90s. In the 1990s,
wow.
Which is not far off. Moon base in the 2020s.
Oh, getting there.
that might not be far off.
Yeah.
This one I'm looking forward to. Nuclear war in 2044.
Oh, that's going to be fab.
Fab. That's a fab one. And then once the whole of the northern hemisphere has been destroyed, Australia and Brazil are in a new space race to get to Mars for 2094. I'm kind of hoping that the timeline that this book isn't very accurate, really. But
Yeah, let's hope so.
yeah, landings on Mars in 2094, actually, that's not totally unfeasible, to be fair.
But hopefully without the whole nuclear war thing, I'd be happy.
Yeah, but without the nuclear war in the middle, I think if there's a nuclear war in the middle, I don't think that's feasible.
Yeah, I can't see the next one happening either. Venus in 2144. I tell you what, that's to have some sun cream.
Yeah, and everything else cream. Anti-acid rain cream.
That's the one, yeah.
All of these kind of books come to a crashing halt because Mariner 4 in July 65 actually gets to Mars.
Incredible.
Takes pictures, and there it is. It's heavily cratered, thin atmosphere, no canals,
no gondolas.
But the lack of surface water, complete surprise to all scientists. Sagan, at that point thought there were going to be plants everywhere, and it's just incredible. I think that's like only just before I was born, and Mars was, we were clinging on to the hope that it was a planet with lots of life on, only to find that it's just as barren as the moon. Or is it?
Or is it? Or was it?
Or is it? Or was it? The great thing, what I love about all the authors that we've just heard about and all the books that they've written, most of those writers are commemorated in craters on Mars. So a lot of the craters, the bigger craters, are named after science fiction authors who wrote about Mars. That's craters above 60 kilometers in diameter are named after scientists and authors. Once it gets smaller than that, the craters are just named after random towns on Earth that are just literally picked out of a hat. Just random pool of terrestrial place names, and they pull it out and say, "Yep, there we go. It's Toxteth."
Oh, please tell me there's
crater.
A Kirby. I'd love it if there was a Kirby on Mars.
There even might be a Kirby crater. There is a Birmingham crater. I do know that.
Yeah,
but. Yeah, there's probably a Liverpool crater as well. There's definitely a Bristol crater.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask a question, and this is for all our listeners too, if you haven't fallen asleep, is what decade saw the most launches to Mars? Was it 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, the 10s, or the 20s? Which decade saw the most launches to Mars? Ready?
Go for it. Have I got an answer?
Which one did you? Yeah, go on, answer.
Let's see. Well, the thing is, the way things are going in the 2020s, I think this will be the decade of the most missions. But that doesn't count because they haven't done it yet, have they? It's only 2021. Give us a chance, Matt.
Yeah.
So the first ones were in the 60s, and is it the 70s?
The 70s there was 11 Mars missions, which puts it in second position.
Right. Okay.
And numero uno position is the 60s. 13 attempts to get to Mars.
Wow.
Yeah. The 80s only saw 2 attempts.
Paltry.
The 80s and space is a complete nightmare.
Completely. Absolutely.
So 90s saw 8, 2000 saw 8. The 10s only saw 6 missions.
That's terrible.
So the 2020s so far have seen 3. So that's pretty good.
That's really good going. If we go for three a year, then, that's going to be a lot of not emissions.
Yeah.
30.
But actually, the good news is there has never been as many active Mars missions as there are today. So there's 11 active Mars missions right now, which is a record. So we've never ever had as many of that. So 2021 is the year of the most amount of active Mars missions.
Well, that makes me feel a bit better.
Yeah. What we should talk about is the poor old Russians.
Oh,
when
not
it
again.
comes to going to Mars, you've got to feel sorry for them.
Definitely.
They were the first to try. And they've not really had a fully successful mission there yet, and they've not landed properly. Although they do have some claims to some firsts. Like they're the first people to soft land on Mars, but it never actually sent any decent photo back. It sent back a grey photo, so it doesn't really count. So the first two missions, the Mars 1M program, or Marsnik as it was known in the British press, Mars 60A and Mars 60B, Korabel 4, Korabel 5, as they were known to the Russians, neither of them even got out of low Earth orbit. They got to an altitude of 100 miles and then fell back down again. Not quite the 100 million miles required.
Did they get a certificate for just trying or anything like that?
No, there is no equivalent of the wooden spoon in space. Then missions 3 and 4, they tried again. They both failed to get out of Earth orbit. Again, right? Disaster, right? Their fifth mission, Mars 1, or Beta Nu 1, 1962, launched to Mars on November the 1st, 1962, and it actually achieved interplanetary orbit, so it was on its way. But once it got into 106 million kilometers from Earth, on its way, for some reason, what's very, very hard, obviously, is that the antenna always has to be pointing in the right direction to be able to communicate. And obviously that system failed at that point. Well, no one really knows what happens to it. It could have been hit by an alien spacecraft, but that's probably what happened. So,
it's most likely.
So lost. That number 5, lost. Number 6 and 7, the Zond 1964A and the Zond 1964B. Basically, Zond, the first one, failed at launch, which is a complete disaster. The second one, the second one, mid-course maneuver, lost. So probably blew up. Some valve somewhere opened and the whole thing blew up. So again, lost. 1969. So America have already got there 60s. Now with the yeah. So the Russians were really trying to get there, but they just, they looked like they were losing the space race. But you think about the 60s and just how much Russia were doing in the 60s in space. They were proper going for it, a bit like China are now, really.
Yeah.
But they're really going for it. They build another 2, 7 and 8. Both of them crash on Proton rockets, and the Proton rockets, like when you read about those launches, they are so scary. Like people get stuck in the launch complex because there's bits of Proton rocket blocking the way out, and there's hydrazine absolutely everywhere, and they have to wait until it rains to wash it all away.
Flipping heck.
Mission number 9.
Here we go.
The Cosmos 419. It was supposed to be the first spacecraft that got into orbit around Mars, which would have been a coup for the Russians. Failed to launch due to the upper stage malfunctioning. So again, lost. So 10 and 11 were... So this one's all right. So 10 and 11, 2 probes, the M71 project, Mars 2 and 3. They had an orbiter and a lander, first rovers beyond the moon. They did actually launch in 1971 and reach Mars 7 months later. The lander of Mars 2 crash landed because the computer malfunctioned.
Yeah.
But the first ever man-made object to reach the surface of Mars was on December the 2nd, 1971.
Finally.
When little baby Matt was only 3 months old.
I was -8.
I was just looking forward to my first Christmas.
Full of hope.
Full of hope. The Mars 3 lander became the first spacecraft to achieve a soft landing, but its transmission was interrupted after 14.5 seconds, so it didn't last very long.
But they did it.
But the orbiters, both orbiters 2 and 3, actually did send back loads of data. So that was actually pretty successful, the orbiters.
You get there in the end. That's the thing about the Russians.
Yeah. And then they had mixed success, really, with 12, 13, 14, and 15 attempts, Mars 4, 5, 6, and 7. But yeah, they did the same sort of things, managed to get into orbit. Some of the landers completely missed the planet. They did all right in the end.
It's like they were trying to complete a really expensive computer game.
Yeah. But of course, the most recent was the Chinese and Russian mission, Phobos Grunt. And it was supposed to, go and get samples as well, this thing. But it didn't get out of low Earth orbit, which is pretty horrendous. And I think the Chinese were not happy about that.
No, they wouldn't be.
The whole lot smashing down into the Pacific Ocean again. So, yeah, and I remember Phobos Grunt very, very well. It's like, wow, that is not good. Not good at all. Americans, of course, have had a lot better time. So I'm going to quickly whip through those so we can get to Eric's interview. But yes, the Americans, what did they do? Their first and second attempts, 1964. Mariner 3 and Mariner 4, identical spacecraft. I noticed that the Russians and the Americans both went for this, doing it in pairs.
Yeah.
That's going to show how unreliable it all was.
Strength in numbers.
Mariner 3 lost, didn't get out of Earth orbit. But Mariner 4 did manage the fly past, of course, on July the 14th, 1965, with the first ever close-up photographs of another planet. And they're recorded on a little tiny tape recorder inside the probe and then sent back.
Amazing.
And of course, this absolutely changed everything. It changed everything because suddenly everyone knew now that the surface atmosphere was only 1% of Earth's, that the daytime temperatures were probably minus 100 degrees centigrade.
Balmy.
That there was the big one, no magnetic field.
No chance.
And radiation belts as a result, which means, of course, that the atmosphere just gets whipped off by the solar wind. So they were just starting to understand that. And it's like, yep, no life. And, I mean, that's a total disappointment, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
The excitement of, oh, my God, we've got there, followed by the utter crushing realization that it's not that great a place.
Sucker
all.
punch.
So,
Sucker punch.
But of course, I had to go back to the drawing board for all the landers as well, because what they thought was a thick atmosphere or anything to get through. No, you're sort of landing through a really thin atmosphere, which makes things very, very difficult. But NASA's next attempt, the Mariner program, was flyby probes 6 and 7, and they both reached the planet in 1969. Which is incredible. 69, Fantastic. What a year for space.
I know, I was just thinking, I mean, maybe it even might have been slightly overshadowed by what else was going on, but...
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's somehow more impressive, isn't it, to get to Mars?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely
It's like you have to travel 300 million miles rather than 250,000 miles.
Yeah, I would imagine the Mars department and the Moon department were just like sworn enemies, and they were like, 250,000 miles, get out of town. We've done tens of millions. It would have been a good bit of fun in the canteen, I reckon.
Again, Mariner 8 destroyed in a launch failure. Mariner 9, however, does get to Mars, and that's a super duper one. So Mariner 9 joins the Soviet orbiters Mars 2 and 3. Just at the point where Mars is having a planet-wide dust storm. So it can't really take any decent photos. So they get it to go over and photograph Phobos. But they also look at Mars for a bit, and as the storm's clearing, they can see the odd surface feature. And one of those features is Nix Olympica. And they can see that crikey, this thing must be absolutely enormously high. And it turns out that it's the highest mountain volcano in the entire solar system, which of course means that they decide to call it Olympus Mons.
Olympus Mons.
Now, it has to be said that the next landing, the Viking 1 and 2 program, the Viking program, just insane.
Yeah. Incredible.
So they're the second and third spacecraft to successfully land on Mars, except they actually did send back colour photos from the surface of Mars. So they're the first objects ever to land on a planet and actually function correctly. Now, here's a very, very interesting fact from Viking, is that there was a biological experiment on board the Viking lander that at the time was inconclusive. It at the time said, oh my God, there really is sort of simple microbial life on Mars. And everyone went, nah, there's probably other reasons for it. But it was reanalyzed in 2012 by Giorgio Bianchiardi.
Giorgio Bianchiardi.
I wonder if he was born in March, but it's and the paper is titled "Complexity Analysis of the Viking Labeled Release Experiments," and the conclusion is that experiment suggests robust signs of microbial life on Mars.
Oof.
So there's a good chance, or I mean, it's hard to say it, but there's a good chance that Viking might have actually discovered life on Mars, but we just daren't say it until Percy or another trip there also proves it, repeats the experiment, I guess.
Yeah.
But that's crazy, isn't it?
Absolutely amazing. And at the time, they were just like, nah. Another disappointment. Like, yeah,
it's like, can we really say it's life? I don't know. It just we better not say it.
Yeah,
America had actually a complete and utter nightmare with their Mars Observer Orbiter. That was the one that really took the wind out of the American sails.
Yeah,
in 1993, they lost contact with it. And it looked like it probably blew up on the way to Mars due to some check valve problem in the pressurization system. And that's what happened to the Akatsuki space probe as well in 2010, although they did actually save that one.
It's just so tough. There's so much more complexity, isn't there? When you get into this distance and you get into this sort of level of basically trying to navigate and all the technical aspects of it, and there's a lot more failures for Mars than any other, really.
There's so many, but from this point onwards, we start to get insane reliability, actually.
Yeah,
because after that failure, you have one of the best missions ever, which is Mars Pathfinder. So that gets there is in 1997, July the 4th, and that had a lander and a little tiny rover called Sojourner. So obviously Sojourner is a bit like, and I've heard this said before as well, it's a bit like the helicopter on Perseverance in the fact that it's a test, a technology demonstrator, and it's like, will rovers be any good on Mars?
Yeah.
And yes, it was. It was. And all that technology and the airbag landing system as well that they used for that particular mission was used for like the really amazing Mars exploration rovers, Spirit and Opportunity. But
bounce them down.
Before then, we've got Mars Global Surveyor, which went into orbit and did a pretty amazing, weird looping ellipse to get down to a circular orbit to start surveying the Mars, and started mapping in 1999, still going. Mars Odyssey arrives in 2001, another amazing mission.
Was it named Odyssey because
it
it was 2001? Was it Odyssey because 2001, A Space Odyssey? Is that why they called it that?
Ooh.
They should have some sort of tribute to Kubrick after all he did with the moon landings.
Yeah. Here's my favourite, is 2003.
Oh, here we go.
You get the European Space Agency with Mars Express sets
We're
off
here
from
to
Baikonur.
stay. Yes.
And then off we go. And of course, the Europeans are the first people to successfully get into Mars orbit on our first attempt.
Have that Russia, China, America.
And you know, so gets into orbit around Mars on Christmas Day 2003. And I remember this really well because, of course, in Britain, what we really wanted to know about was Beagle 2. So Mars Express orbiter's in orbit. That's safe. It's one of the most important Mars bits of hardware out there at the moment. But Beagle 2 went into Mars's atmosphere, but they couldn't communicate with it once it had gone through its 7 minutes of terror, although I don't think it was called 7 minutes of terror back then. And of course, it landed in bouncing balls as well.
Yep.
But it was never, ever, ever communicated with. And no one really knew what had happened to it, but everyone assumed it had just litho-braked into the ground. In other words, just smashed into the ground and was destroyed. However, Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter managed to get some pictures quite recently of the spacecraft on the ground, and one of the solar panels has failed to deploy, and that's all that was wrong, and that blocks the aerial from being able to communicate. And so which does actually make Beagle 2 the first and only British and European probe to achieve a soft landing on Mars. So I would say that the British have actually achieved a soft landing on Mars, as have the Russians, have the United States, but the US are the only people to achieve a working probe afterwards, which I suppose is the point. But soft landing wise, actually, poor old Pillinger, the guy that was the Beagle 2 boss, died before he ever found that out, even though he maintained it all along. And it's a very sad story, but it's such a pity, because if Beagle 2 had worked, there was a pretty strong chance that it may have returned back a Viking type result of, oh my God, there's life on Mars, which would have been pretty awesome.
Is there any way they can send something to just peel that solar panel out, you know, like just grab hold of it and open it up?
It's probably knackered now, though, isn't it? Yeah,
I guess.
I don't know. It might be worth it.
Yeah,
because it's a pretty expensive piece of kit.
Exactly.
A mass spectrometer, the smallest of its kind at the time. Next was NASA's Mars exploration rovers, Spirit and Opportunity, that were so insanely successful. 2004 they landed, and they just carried on going. And it's only a couple of years ago now that they lost contact with Opportunity, but they'd been on there for absolutely ages.
Yeah.
Just incredible missions, completely outlived their total mission time.
Is there any idea of what kind of distance that they've covered in that time?
It's a lot. It is a lot. Opportunity did a very, very long distance. Last week we talked about Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, which one of the main instruments that Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter has is a massive telescope, like a huge reflecting telescope called HiRISE.
Yeah,
and it's the largest telescope on a deep space mission. It's 0.5 meters in diameter, which is pretty flipping big.
Yeah.
And that was the one that took pictures of both Curiosity and Perseverance landing, which I think is just an incredible feat of engineering, just like mind-blowing. Like I said, it's like pointing your microscope at a football to try and capture a bacteria landing on the football.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It's just mind-blowing.
We're now watching ourselves doing what we're doing. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah. So that was in 2006 that managed to get into operation after 5 months of aero braking. So the way that worked was it used the very thin atmosphere to try and slow down and circularize its orbit, which is very, very clever.
Yeah.
And it's still obviously in operation. Then Curiosity, enough said about Curiosity. Insane in the membrane. Brilliant piece of gear. That's landed on Mars 2012.
Yeah. That was your first,
8.5 years ago.
First rover to have a Twitter account.
Oh, is that right? Well, I suppose Twitter was quite new then, yeah.
Yeah.
I always think about Spirit and Opportunity are sort of pre all that social media nonsense, aren't they?
Yeah, completely.
And then Maven is another mission that arrived in 2014. And then we've got India.
India joins the game.
Yeah, the Mangalian arrives in 2013. And so India also joined the European list of arriving at Mars on their first attempt.
Well in.
And getting into orbit.
Nice one, lads.
When you listen to how much bother the Russians had, you realise what a massive achievement that is for the Indians to have done.
Yeah, incredible.
For $71 million. That's all it cost. The whole budget.
What? That is insane.
I know. Yeah, that's less than some rocket launches. Just the launch. Yeah. Absolutely mad. Absolutely mad. Europeans again, ExoMars, Trace Gas Orbiter. That went off. And of course, it carried yet another lander. This time, Schiaparelli, which of course is where we started this whole story.
Yeah, full circle.
The Schiaparelli lander also smashed into the surface of Mars this time.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
And I see there that it was an EDM lander, which is, not my favourite type of music, but the kids like it.
It was a smash hit.
Drops the bass or we'll work something out.
You should wait for the drop. Yeah.
Wait for the drop. There it is. Excellent.
Insight, of course, that's a nice new one with the mural and things like that. And the great thing about Insight were the two little CubeSats, Marco A and Marco B, that flew alongside it.
Oh, we love those CubeSats.
Of course, Insight's still going. And, of course, we've recently been joined by Hope, Tianwen, and Perseverance.
Wonderful.
Which has got a blooming helicopter. I keep trying to get my head around that. Yeah. A helicopter.
It's incredible.
So we should see the helicopter probably in April. And then in May, we'll see the Chinese attempt at being the first country after the US to soft land and operate a rover on Mars. Can you imagine that?
Yep, it's going to be brilliant.
That'll make them Ruskies jealous.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's for sure.
But I would like to see those two rovers have a bit of a fight. I think that would be great. I mean, they're probably landing very far away from each other, but, a fight would still be great. To the death.
Or maybe Tianwen will go over and just lift up that last little solar panel for poor old people.
Just pick it off. Just peel it back. That's all they need to do.
Go on, please.
Please.
And of course, soon, 2022, we'll see Jamie Franklin rover. I mean, the Rosalind Franklin rover go to Mars. That should be pretty good. The Russian Roscosmos ESA mission to Mars, which will be very exciting, and India are going to try again in 2024.
Go on, India, you can do it.
To keep up with the Chinese, they're probably going to have a little rover with that as well.
What's this one going to cost them? About £5?
About 60 quid. Amazing. Chris, do you want to hear my interview with the absolutely untouchable Eric Berger?
I would absolutely love to, Matthew.
So, yes, next week we'll probably have a little deep dive into how humans are going to get to Mars, but some of these questions are answered a little bit in this interview.
Okay.
Hey, Cootie!
The Interplanetary podcast is alive!
Welcome back to the podcast, Eric.
It is always a pleasure.
It's certainly a pleasure for me. I need to tell you that you are by far the most popular guest. I can have Matthias Maurer, I can have Brian Cox, but Eric Berger, you are the most popular guest. So I think that either says something about my listeners or says something about you.
I don't know what it says, but I'm flattered and a little nervous at the same time.
Before we start, there's one tweet that you made that I interacted with I keep seeing that come back up. So it's obviously something that interests people. You commented about how delayed SLS was, and I commented on, oh my God, that means we won't see people on it until 2027 was my guess. And then you said, probably we never will. And people keep asking you to back that up, and you tend to back that up. So I'm going to ask you, do you think humans will ever fly on SLS?
It's a great question, and I think it's still very much to be determined. This all started because I went drinking with a friend and source back in 2017, and he's a pretty knowledgeable guy about the industry in general, not affiliated with SLS or anything like that. And I just said, really, XXX, your name. What do you think? When do you think SLS is really going to launch? And we had a few beers at that point. He's like, 2023. And it seemed preposterous at the time. And it was, I just threw it out on Twitter because why not? And over time, the seemingly preposterous date of a 2023 first launch has gotten closer and closer to reality. I think it's accurate to say now we're looking at spring of 2022, probably is the realistic earliest launch date for the rocket. And if that's the case, that raises all kinds of questions like, is that flight rate enough to sustain the rocket? And will NASA ultimately decide that maybe you should just put cargo only on SLS? Or maybe it's one of the things where it flies once and then it gets canceled because of cost, because Starship is up and flying at that point. I just think there are lots of reasons to think that while we may see Artemis 1 fly on SLS, Artemis 2 and beyond may fly on other vehicles. I mean, the barn door was already open when Starship was selected as one of the 3 companies for the human landing system. Right? And I mean, when you look at the bid, it's not, the crew doesn't launch on Starship. And SLS and Orion take the crew out to meet Starship in lunar orbit. Starship goes down on the moon, comes back, the crew gets into Orion and comes back to Earth. Now, do you think that's really how that mission would go?
It does. Yeah. Well, the only thing that I can think why you'd do it that way is because of the lack of launch escape on Starship.
So that's fine. And I think it will be quite a while before crew members launch on Starship. But okay, then they launch on Crew Dragon, which, oh, by the way, flies on a rocket that's flown 100 times and has a damn good safety record. And Crew Dragon, it will have flown a number of missions by then. So it's much more experienced than Orion. And it rendezvous in low Earth orbit with Starship. And Starship takes them out to the moon and back. There's lots of other ways to architect this. And we'll know more in the coming months when the human land system contracts get moving to the second phase. And I would just say that all of the architecture for Artemis, which thankfully does look like it's moving forward, is very much in play.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the only thing that I would say is, you want 2 systems, don't you? I mean, one of the sort of massive problems with the International Space Station is that there was only one system for getting up there for a long time until SpaceX rescued that situation. So if you're serious about having a moon base, for example, you wouldn't want just one system going there, would you?
You wouldn't, but I mean, the Dynetics lander is going to launch on Vulcan, and the Blue Origin lander is probably going to launch on New Glenn or Vulcan. So again, you've got triple redundancy on rockets and getting stuff to low Earth orbit or to the moon. So again, the rocket is just not the essential part of the equation. Right now, the essential part of the equation is the lander.
Yeah, so yeah, that's not looking well. You've answered that one pretty comprehensively. I don't know really where to go with it, but yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I just thought I'd bring it up because I know that it's everyone waits on your bated breath with bated breath for you to answer that one. I think,
and the program is not helping itself because the core stage has been on the test stand in southern Mississippi now for more than 13 months. And yeah, there were problems last year. I mean, it was a really nasty year for hurricanes on the northern Gulf of Mexico. And they had COVID-19 to deal with, as everyone did, and that was no fun. But, they finally got around and were going to test in November, and there was a pre-valve issue, and that set them back about 6 weeks. And then they tested in January for 67.1 seconds and had problems. So they never really got to the meatiest part of the test with this really intense thrust vectoring where they move the engines around and so forth, things you need to do during the launch process. And so now they were going to test this week, February 25th, today actually, and they had another pre-valve issue. And so they haven't set a new date for the test. And so SLS program could help itself immensely if it could execute. Unfortunately, we're continuing to see evidence that it's just very difficult for them to do so.
Do you think New Glenn is going to fly this year?
Well, we are just extremely timely. And no, I have been saying New Glenn is not flying until 2023 for quite some time. And just hot off the presses, Blue Origin just put out a press release this morning saying they're now targeting Q4 2022 for the first launch of New Glenn. So we can definitively answer your question saying not this year. And let's be real. If the date for something in aerospace is the fourth quarter of next year, it's not flying in the fourth quarter of next year, right? It's slipping into 2023. And the fact of the matter is, I'm not sure people appreciate, this is a huge rocket. Like New Glenn is going to be a super impressive booster. And for Blue Origin, to go from New Shepard, which is a tidy little launch system with a small BE-3 engine, to 7 BE-4 engines on this honking rocket that, oh, by the way, is really expensive to build. So they're going to try to land it right out of the gate. That's a massive undertaking. And so, again, it was never realistic to expect it to as soon as it was thought. But when it does eventually fly, it should be a very impressive booster.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it. That is definitely a contemplate tickets to America to watch. Yeah. What are your thoughts on the Perseverance landing?
I mean, it keeps sending us this wonderful things from Mars that we hadn't seen or heard before. I remember when I first heard about Perseverance, or it was Mars 2020 back in the day. I was like, another Curiosity. I mean, we've done this, right? What's the big deal? And that, of course, was an idiotic take because Perseverance has all these cool things like the helicopter, the sample caching, the looking for, trying to pull carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So it's doing some very cool things. And the video from the landing was just unbelievable, seeing that parachute pop out so quickly. And then sort of the image of the sky crane pulling away, leaving the rover, and then the audio, of course, from the surface. And then just yesterday, someone did some image correction on one of the very first photos that Perseverance took. And if you look in the distance, you can see the cloud of dust, smoke, or whatever from the descent stage crashing. And it's like, oh, wow, that's so cool. So, I mean, this mission has already, in just a few days, delivered such wonderful imagery from Mars, and now it's going to go off and explore the Delta. So, I mean, it's stunning. It's amazing, and it's a credit to NASA and the contractors who continue to pull off these, super hard missions to the surface of Mars.
Yeah, it's nice to talk about NASA in good terms, because it's just what an incredible mission, and that's what NASA do like amazingly well. I mean,
Oh yeah, it's tremendous.
And that, yeah, you're right. That the footage of the sky crane itself, and the bit that annoys me is you can't see flames coming out of the out of the other rocket engines. And I know that's just going to be conspiracy theories for days now. But talking of Mars, so we have Mars's greatest, the person that wants to get to Mars more than anyone else on Earth is, of course, Elon Musk. And your new book is essentially about Elon Musk and the early days of SpaceX.
That's right. It takes a look at the formation of the company, and really the narrative is built around the first 4 launches of the Falcon 1 rocket, where they failed 3 times, and then with everything on the line, they made it to space the 4th time. And while in general, you may think, well, who cares about the dinky little rocket that they never really flew much because no one wanted to launch on it. What's the big deal about that? But I have to say, if you want to understand why SpaceX has transformed the launch industry over this decade, you've got to go back to the last decade in the beginning and really see sort of how Elon put the DNA into SpaceX then. And it was the same Elon in 2002 as it is today. One of the things that I love is that even the very first people that he hired at the company, he would tell them that he was starting a space company to send people to Mars. And Gwen Shotwell, who's now the company's president, told me, she interviewed with him, I think in August of 2002. She said he was compelling, scary, but compelling. So the book is about him, the company, and really the people that made it possible for them to succeed ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the thing that I've noticed with the book, is that we're introduced to a lot of characters, and I'm pretty terrible at keeping up with characters and their names and things, but it's brilliant the way that you're bringing in the different characters, and you can see their personalities and how they're interacting with Elon Musk almost immediately. Like you said, the Gwyn Shotwell one is really fascinating, how she's spotted that it's a company that's trying to do things how she would actually want to do it, but she resists joining for a bit as well.
Yeah, the great thing about Gwen is, in the aerospace industry, in the space industry in the US and around the world, I mean, Elon is a pretty controversial figure. He says things that piss people off. He, is not nice to his competitors. He doesn't withhold insults, right? Generally. But Gwen, everyone loves Gwen, right? Even Tori Bruno loves Gwen. I mean, the head of United Launch Alliance, the SpaceX's biggest U.S. competitor. I mean, she's seen as this sort of, always smiling, happy, nice person. But the funny thing is, like, they are totally simpatico behind the scenes. Like, Gwen wants to crush the industry just as much as Elon does. She's just sort of wears velvet gloves when she talks and does things.
Well, yeah, and that it definitely comes across. I mean, let's start from the very early days. I mean, one of the sort of things that comes across in your book, and I don't know whether this is just me the way that I've read it, but it comes across that it's very much feels like it's all cobbled together at the start, that they have the factory, everyone has to sort of muck in, that the hours are extremely long. Is that a culture that's remained within SpaceX, that still that's the case? If you went to the places of work now, you would see people pulling these ridiculous long hours, but occasionally playing Quake against each other.
Well, it's changed a lot, because you've gone from a company with a few dozen employees, and that's really what it was with that first Falcon 1 rocket. It was literally several dozen people building the rocket, testing the rocket, moving it to the launch site, getting the permissions. I mean, there's so much work that goes into that. And especially back then, when there was no roadmap for how a private company would do this. today there's 6,000, 7,000 employees. And so some of that has changed, and they are cognizant of the work environment. I mean, one of the people that I focus on in the book is a guy named Brian Beldy, who started off as a pretty early hire, like he's employee 14 or something, who was doing some, engineering for them. And he ended up doing human resources. He's the head of HR now for SpaceX. And the quote in the book is, he's like, it was like dog years at SpaceX. It was 1 year, for everyone else, felt like 7 years for us. And so they've tried to make it less so. I mean, I think when you're on a project or something where it's like intense, like you're going to be working 80 hours, like if you're in Boca Chica, right, and an engineer down there, and Elon is out there trying to work on a bulkhead, I mean, he's up all night, you're up all night. But I think there's a better work-life balance at the company, but it's still, I mean, one of the keys behind their success is that Elon applies this constant pressure to move things forward. Like, he always wants things done faster. And so he's constantly telling his managers and his employees to move faster and giving them these arbitrarily difficult deadlines. And so that's why you see SpaceX doing things at a rate that other aerospace companies don't. It's because of him and sort of his demanding presence.
Yeah, because I mean, there's sections in the book where, like, a phone call because they've run out of liquid oxygen, for example, and he basically says to them, if this happens again, you all get the sack. Is that, I mean, do his employees take that sort of as something that's impressive, as in they want to live up to the ideal, or do they find it scary and actually just go, well, we can't let him down, and therefore there's that. I can't work it out whether the culture is one of being inspired by the boss or scared by the boss. Or maybe
so in the movie Return of the Jedi, at the beginning, when there's this scene where the Emperor's ship flies into the Death Star under construction, and the Emperor gets out, and Vader says, well, you didn't have to come here. And the Emperor's like marching along in the Imperial March. I mean, I don't want to say it's exactly like that, but like when Elon shows up on whatever project you're working on, like it certainly raises the temperature. In answer to your question, I think it's both things. He is both inspiring and also can be terrifying, right? The people that he finds, the engineers that he finds to work at SpaceX, want to be challenged. And so they're there. They know they're going to work hard. They know they're going to work long hours. But they also know that they're going to get a chance to work on things that they couldn't do anywhere else. I mean, there's no other private company in the world launching humans into space right now. SpaceX is the world's largest satellite operator. They've launched the world's largest, most powerful rocket in Falcon Heavy. No one's landing rockets on boats. No one's building Starship, this ambitious vehicle to go to Mars, right? So you go to SpaceX because the boss is a little crazy, but the boss is also this visionary genius who has great ideas, and also has a track record. So, I mean, you kind of know what you're getting into. As I say, it's inspirational and it's a little terrifying, and that's what you sign up for.
Yeah, I mean, it must have been harder for the guys right at the beginning, like particularly like pre-2008, where where nothing has happened really, and his track record is PayPal, or pretty much that's it. And it's like, was he lucky was Elon Musk a little bit lucky with the first few employees that he managed to hook into the company? Because presumably he didn't know what he was doing. He would not say
he was lucky, but I think he was lucky. He was particularly lucky to get people like Tom Muller, who was the head of propulsion, just brilliant guy who, sort of pushed forward the Merlin engine and made that work. He was lucky to get people like Tim Buzza, who was the launch director, and worked as hard as you can believe to get this stuff done. But he's also a charismatic guy, and he's not just sort of there cracking the whip. He's in those meetings. He's staying up late. He's helping with the hardest engineering problems. So he's in it to win it too. And I think that goes a long way. And if you can convince Elon, well, we can make this launch date, or we can do this, but we've got to have this amount of liquid oxygen. We've got to have this metal. We've got to have, yada, yada, yada. Then he's like, okay, do it. There's no like, as he funnily told me, he's like, we're not really a traditional company because the CFO of this company is in my head and the chief engineer is in this head. So I don't have to, like, the engineer and the CFO don't have to have a meeting and the engineer convince the CFO that we need to buy something. I just have to decide it, and then we go do it. So that's another reason why they can move fast, is there's no real committee meetings. It's just Elon's like, okay, do it, and they do it.
I mean, the book certainly, I mean, I've always known the story, obviously, of how close SpaceX were to not really making it, as in they had one more launch left in them, and then that's the money, that's Elon's massive wealth over. But I mean, I must admit, after the chapter that I'm on at the moment, the fourth launch is just mind blowing. It's mind blowing how ridiculous it is. Was there something where you were studying this story where you thought, oh my God, that really is ridiculous? How on earth did it come to that? What was?
I mean, there were a couple moments. A couple of my favorite stories are the Mutiny before the first launch. Where basically they were working all night trying to get the first rocket ready, and there was miscommunication because there would be calls between California and Kwajalein, which was the main island in this tiny atoll in the Pacific, and then there would sort of be calls from Kwajalein to Almalek, which was this even tinier island, about 20 miles away, where they were actually assembling the rocket and going to launch it from. And it just felt very heavy-handed, the instructions coming down, and one day they ran out of food and cigarettes, and so the employees said, basically stopped working, and until a helicopter arrived and they pushed some food and cigarettes out of it to the mutineers. And as Bülent Altan, one of the people on the island, told me, it was a little bit like Lord of the Flies when the workers saw the helicopters, they just kind of rushed over. And then I mean, there was the time when an intern brought a gun to the military base because he thought it was dangerous. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of crazy stuff that they tried. They had a huge problem with getting liquid oxygen out to the middle of the Pacific. And you might imagine why, right? Because it's got to be shipped from California to Hawaii and then shipped to Kwajalein. That's a long time for liquid oxygen. It's at sub-freezing temperatures to be baking in the sun. And so they would lose 1/2 to 1/4 of the amount of LOX before they even took delivery of it. So they ordered this machine that supposedly pulled oxygen from the air and liquefied it. And it didn't work very well. So they were, I mean, it's hard enough. Like, no company ever built an orbital rocket and launched it from anywhere. Like, no private company had done that with their own money. And they had to not just do that, they had to do it in the middle of absolutely nowhere, right, on Kwajalein. So it's remarkable what they did.
Yeah, it is truly nuts, and it's. I mean, one of the things that the book sort of goes over are the people that have gone before Elon Musk, the decade before, people who've tried it and wasted all their money, and how it kind of, that first static fire test took the military by surprise. And do you think in some ways that learning experience of Elon Musk dealing with NASA, dealing with the military, and being the person that they're trying to suppress, of sort of go away type mentality that they seem to have with him, do you think that all those failures in some ways helped Elon Musk and others at SpaceX learn how to deal with those two players that they would eventually control almost?
I would say it's less that, and it's more that, again, Elon found Gwen Shotwell early on, and she had a background and working for the Aerospace Corporation and a couple of other places. And so she had lots of good contacts at the military, with DoD, Department of Defense, and NASA. And so she was really good at managing those relationships, where SpaceX would run into problems. Because the thing you have to understand with Elon is he always wants to run forward as fast as possible. And anything in his way is an obstacle to be moved, run through, or jumped over. We saw this most recently with the SN8 and SN9 launches of Starship from South Texas. They launched SN8 without a final clearance from the FAA, which is really not good. And then when they were trying to get clearance for SN9 to fly, he angrily tweeted, "This is bureaucracy, blah blah blah." But that's kind of how he sees the government, like being in his way. And so his intention is to fight, and Gwen Shotwell is good at helping him either fight those battles or sort of saying, hey, we really ought to pick and choose our spots to sort of stand up to these guys. Because it is remarkable. I mean, even before their first launch, they had already protested a NASA contract and sued the government. And today, they're NASA's most important contractor, and increasingly they're on par with the DoD, with United Launch Alliance. So, yeah.
I mean, it's just phenomenal, isn't it? It really brought it home to me that the sort of third failure and the fact that Tesla were really struggling as well. And it's 2008, and there's a crash, and you think, how on earth did he really sort of navigate through that? It really was genuinely very close. And you think 12 years later or 13 years later, and they're the only game in town. And Elon Musk's the only game in town as well. He's the richest, he's the richest man on earth.
I mean, if you go back, and that is my favorite part of the book, is that 8-week period between the third flight, which they all assumed was going to be successful. They had a bunch of customers on it. It had some ashes from Scotty from Star Trek, for goodness sake. And Bob Reagan, who was the vice president of manufacturing at the time, this machinist told me that, they had brought like a ice block into the factory in California that they just moved into. And he and Gwen Shotwell were back there taking shots on the shot luge, sort of just like celebrating. And then that rocket, failed, and they had 8 weeks to get the final one put together. And it's just all of the things that could have gone wrong and had to go right during that period. It's to me, I just think that's just an amazing story, and I'm glad to really be able to tell it, fulsomely in this book. And it speaks to the fortitude, I think, of Musk, that he was able to weather the financial pressures faced by SpaceX. Tesla was not really selling cars yet. His marriage had fallen apart. He was out of money in the middle of a recession, trying to find capital for these two companies. And sort of he held it all together. And the trajectory since then has not entirely been up for SpaceX, but it is, by and large, really, since the end of 2008, just been nothing but sort of stratospheric. And that's one of the reasons why I thought it was important to tell this story, because, how did they do it? And the answers are sort of in those first years where they did run into a lot of the hurdles. I mean, I saw it was an interesting discussion on Reddit just the other day about how the Merlin engine has been such a champion, right? And it's for the Falcon 9 rocket, and it really has. It's had wonderful performance, and now they can use them over and over and over again on these missions. And it seemed like it worked almost from the beginning when they put it on the Falcon 9. And the reason is, they had screwed around with the Merlin engine for 6 years to try to get it to work for the Falcon 1. And so then by the time they got to the end of that program, it was ready to go for the Falcon 9.
But when they get that fourth flight to work and the company's saved, at what point was Elon thinking about Falcon 9? Was it before then or after then? that he's gone, right, let's forget Falcon 1 and just build this monstrous thing, because my life hasn't been enough of as a roller coaster as it is.
Well, it's funny, you know, on the first launch attempt in March of 2006, there's this funny story where a guy named Chris Thompson is the launch conductor. So basically the commands that are going to the rocket are going through him. And so they're counting down to the very first launch of the Falcon 1. And Elon kept coming over to Thompson in this small control room in Kwajalein, pestering him, right? As Thompson said, having these really intense discussions about ordering aluminum for what was then the Falcon 5 rocket. And this was like 20 minutes before the first launch. And after one of these conversations, Tim Buzza, who was the launch director, turns to Thompson and says, "What the hell's going on?" Like, you know, it's like, so Elon was like worried about the Falcon 5 before he'd even launched the Falcon 1 the first time. And a few months later, they got a development contract from NASA to start work designing the Falcon 9 and Cargo Dragon spacecraft. And so, you know, he was thinking, it was in 2006 that he sort of moved from the Falcon 5, which would have had 5 Merlin engines, obviously, to the Falcon 9, which has 9. And so he was thinking about that kind of from that point on. And at that, you know, it became somewhat clear that you had to fly the Falcon 1 to show that you could do it, right? Because you weren't going to get an actual contract from NASA to build and fly Falcon 9s unless you could actually put a rocket into orbit. And so that was another reason why the Falcon 1 project had to be successful, even though commercially it ended up being pretty much a failure.
I think it must be the best chapter, right? The fourth flight. I mean, it's just the most insane story. It's almost like you've made it up.
well, if I made it up, a lot of people had their story straight. So yeah. No, that was one of the fun things, is sort of you had the outlines of this narrative, and then you could go talk to all the people that were there, right? So the incident you're referring to is this flight where they're out of time, they're out of money, and typically they would ship the Falcon 1 first stage by boat to Kwajalein, which was about a 4-week voyage from the factory in California. In this case, they didn't have time to do that, so they arranged for a C-17 flight. And as the rocket is descending into Honolulu on board this plane, it starts imploding due to an unanticipated pressure differential. And it basically, like, the whole thing implodes, and an engineer, a guy named Zach Dunn, who's this amazing person, who is one of my favorite characters to come out of the book. His profile, I think, will be raised after its publication, is the guy who crawls in and opens this valve. You know, can you imagine, like, at 30,000 feet climbing into a dark rocket as it's pinging and imploding, and, like, you know, you could be crushed to sort of try to open this valve to equalize or to get more oxygen inside the tank. I mean, it is something out of a film, isn't it? It is the sort of thing that Bruce Willis would have done in Die Hard or something like that. Right. You know, so it's fun to, like, talk to Zach and talk to Ann Chinnery, who was on the plane, and Florence Lee, who was on the plane. And then also to talk to, like, the vice presidents who are back in California, like, after the plane lands in Hawaii, and they're all calling them and sort of getting their debrief about, like, you know, they're, like, in tears because this last chance rocket appears to be destroyed. And the vice presidents are saying, no, you know, you've got to keep going. So. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that I mean, because one of the things that the pilots of the plane want to just eject the thing out into the sea because it's like they consider it dangerous and things like that. And you think, God, it's totally nuts. It is totally nuts. But yeah, they get through. So, I mean, it really does make you realize that there's such a fine line between extreme success and extreme failure, because, you know, presumably it would just, if Zach Dunn hadn't crawled into the tiny crawl space and hadn't been able to change the valve, then we might not be sitting here talking about Elon Musk. No, I mean, if that rocket hadn't gone, the company would have failed. And if they hadn't gotten that contract from NASA 3 or 4 months later for the Falcon 9 and Dragon, they would have failed too. You know, as Elon said, they would have been the first company to reach orbit and then go bust.
Ouch. Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous. So now he is up and running. Now he's up and running. I'm going to ask just a couple of questions, but yeah, it's a fantastic book, Eric. I've been really, really enjoying it. So thanks very much for my advance copy as well. But just a quick final question then. We've got Starship, and we've seen a couple of belly flops. What SN number do you think we're going to see the first soft landing, no explosion?
I think they'll do this one. I think SN10 will make it. Elon recently said it was like 60% chance of landing. He's learned to set expectations. I remember in advance of the first Falcon 1 launch, he told a reporter from a publication called Fast Company, I believe, that there was a 90% chance of success. And one of the times I interviewed him, I said, "How do you feel about that prediction?" He's like, "Well, obviously there was a 100% chance, or there was a 0% chance of success." But he's learned that since then, to sort of like politicians do it before a debate, to set expectations. Like, I remember talking to him the day before the Falcon Heavy launch, and he said there was a 50-50 chance of success, when in fact it was much higher, especially because the next day the launch was, basically perfect. So when he says 60% chance that SN10 will land, I suspect that's more like 75 or 80% chance that it'll land. So if they don't get it in this flight, they'll get it probably in the next one. They're close. I mean, the problems they've had are not like super difficult. Like, they'll figure out lighting engines and things like that. I mean, they're challenging, but they've gone through some of the same issues with the Falcon 9. And the Merlin.
There definitely seems to be something like just one order of magnitude greater in terms of the difficulty of that final maneuver, though, doesn't there, than the Falcon 9 thing? Although, presumably, I mean, I don't know. Obviously, as an engineering thing, there's no way to tell by just looking at it. But so
Starship itself is easily an order of magnitude more difficult than Falcon 9, because the Falcon 9 first stage goes up and it comes back, and it never gets close to orbital velocity, right? It's just like 6 to 8 times the speed of sound versus 25 times the speed of sound. So Starship is a much larger vehicle coming back to the atmosphere at orbital velocities, and you don't really want to invest a whole lot of effort or mass into landing legs or propellant, because that just kills your orbital payload performance. And you also want to have it be refurbishable in a short period of time. And so they're trying to develop a heat shield that can fly through the atmosphere a lot of times. As you know, with the space shuttle, that the tile system was enormously expensive and, took months and months to turn around. And ultimately had some fatal flaws as well. So, I mean, Starship is a huge challenge. I think, getting the belly flop maneuver right was more challenging than these issues they're having with sort of the last minute burn to make a controlled landing. Because like I said, they have so much experience doing that with the Falcon 9. That's a solvable engineering challenge. The bigger question for me is can they figure out the heat shield issues and sort of continue to do that crazy looking belly flop maneuver to position the vehicle for kind of the worst heating of atmospheric entry.
Yeah. So do you think we'll see an orbital launch of a Starship this year?
The answer to that question is yes. We will see an orbital launch of Starship.
Wow.
Are you wanting a timeline?
Yeah. This year. This year.
I think they could. I think it's definitely within the possibility. Because they're making pretty good progress on the booster. The first one is more than half assembled. They're starting on a second one. My guess would be the first half of next year for an orbital flight.
Will they try one of the Super Heavy boosters before? They won't have a Starship on top of the Super Heavy booster the first time round, or will they?
So plans change all the time, and I am not claiming any kind of special insider status to know what their plans are, but I'm reasonably confident that they'll try some hops first, maybe with one, and we'll get a better idea when they start installing Raptor engines on the booster, because ultimately it's going to have 25, but you could do a small hop with just one. So if they put 3 on, then maybe they're going to do a kilometer flight or something like that. But it'll be like Starship. I think they'll go up higher and work on landing it, and then eventually get to the point where they think that they can go all the way to orbit. And again, the booster's not going to orbit. It's putting Starship on a trajectory to reach orbit, and then it's coming back.
Timeline for a Starship landing on the moon, roughly.
Uncrewed or crewed?
Uncrewed, first of all. Presumably they'll try uncrewed first.
I mean, I could see them doing that in 2023 or 2024 if they got permission. I mean, it's not a trivial matter to get sort of permission to go try to land something that big on the moon, because it could leave a crater. But if they can get Starship to orbit, then the other big hurdle they've got to get is in-space refueling, and so that's going to take a couple of years probably to work on that. But they'll get there. So 2023, 2024 is probably realistic for that.
And then crewed 26. Or is that too soon?
I mean, it's going to depend partly on whether Starship gets selected for the Human Landing System second phase contracts by NASA and what NASA's ultimate timeline for Artemis is. My guess is that timeline becomes something like 2028 rather than 2026. So honestly, I would not, and this is going to diverge widely from SpaceX's timelines, but I have a hard time seeing crewed flights on Starship anywhere before the second half of this decade. And I would say 26 or 27, probably at least for that.
And then, so that leads us on to then Mars. Will Elon Musk attempt human landings on Mars with the Starship?
Again, I think they'll go with NASA because it's just, and I could be wrong about this, and it's kind of stupid to bet against Elon, but there's so many regulatory issues with getting to Mars and launching humans to Mars just from a planetary protection standpoint. And then, Starship is clearly, if it works, the best transportation system. Like, there's nothing even close. Space Launch System, no. New Glenn, no. I mean, nothing in the pipeline would come close to what that vehicle could do. But it takes more than transportation. You've got to have surface power on Mars. You've got to have habitation. You've got to have just keeping people alive. And there's so many of these things NASA spent a long time studying, has a lot of expertise. And so it's difficult for me to see SpaceX just saying like, okay, it's 2028. We're launching 15 people to Mars. I think it will be a mission with NASA, and super difficult for me to see that happening before 2030. But I mean, who knows? He moves fast.
Yeah, I mean, I think 2030 would be, personally, I think that would be super optimistic, wouldn't it? That would be my no earlier than date. Yeah, I'd kind of got this gut feeling that it's going to be, post 2035 at best. Because
if there was no SpaceX,
then that definitely wouldn't be happening at all.
2040 maybe. I mean, you can't do it. You cannot do it with the Space Launch System. You have to have like 10 launches for a single mission, and that rocket flies once a year at best for $2 billion. It's just he and Elon and Jeff Bezos are absolutely right. The foundation of any kind of a space program, any kind of a sustainable space program that's going anywhere, is a low cost, heavy lift, reusable rocket. And so that's what they're both building. I mean, that is the only answer for if you want to go past the moon, is that, because you got to get so much propellant into orbit to go. You cannot do it with a launch once or twice a year of this Titanic, rocket that costs $2 billion and is entirely expendable.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your article a couple of weeks ago about the nuclear propulsion and sticking that SLS, NASA's own numbers, where it was like minimum of 10 launches, wasn't it, just to get the fuel up for a mission like that? And you just
it's really not
absolutely nuts
at all doable. When they say SLS is going to take us to Mars, and Dennis Muilenburg was the CEO of Boeing a few years ago, said we're going to land on Mars in 2033 or some date. I'm not sure what he said, but it was something like that. And it's going to be a Boeing rocket that takes people there. I mean, it's just not. Orion is never going past the moon. SLS is not big enough, and it costs too much. So I mean, it's just
Well, yeah, I mean, well, NASA's own numbers made that like absolutely blatantly clear, didn't they? And so, but in that same report, NASA was suddenly betting quite heavily on nuclear propulsion as the means of getting to Mars and around the solar system. And is that where NASA are diverging away from SpaceX, or is that again just really just a sort of engineering chitter chatter?
Engineering chitter chatter is a good way to put it. I think Musk is entirely cognizant of the mass challenges. Like he told me about a year ago that to have a sustainable human settlement on Mars, you would need to get 1 million tons to the surface of Mars. Okay. So that's, and so his bet on that is not to use nuclear propulsion, which saves you propellant cost. It's basically cuts it in half. His bet is just to make Starship so low cost and so efficient that getting that much mass into low Earth orbit and then sending it to Mars becomes trivial. And so that's why the entire focus on Starship is making it ultra reusable, ultra low cost, as much mass as you can. And you know, he's spent 20 years almost now working toward that goal. And he's taken important steps. The Falcon 9 is this amazing rocket in terms of the cost. Is, you know, they're bringing the cost down, and it flies. You know, they've flown them 8 times now, and they're still finding issues. Certainly, as you get deeper into the program, with flying at 8, 9, 10 times, that's to be expected. But they're learning a lot of valuable lessons that they're trying to apply to Starship. And his bet that if he can build them fast enough, and he wants to build one a week, and that sounded crazy until like they're building them every 2 weeks now. Yeah. So it's not as crazy as it seemed. And if you can really reuse these things 10 or 15 times, then you start to get to some economy of scale. And the bet from NASA is that that's not possible. They're not allowed to think that way. So they're looking at nuclear propulsion. So we'll see. Hopefully one or the other gets people there in our lifetimes, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's good to have both systems, right? So yeah, I mean, you just talked about the Falcon 9, and one last question was the Falcon 9 that didn't make it to the boat the other week. And I'm thinking about Block 5 and the turnaround and how quick they can get that. Is a few questions embedded in this. Is the turnaround getting quick enough for Elon Musk's liking? Was that crash more significant than it seemed in terms of, obviously they'll learn stuff from it, but is there any indication that they can't turn around Falcon, the Block 5, as quick as they would like, and therefore really get into that area where reusability is massively a saving?
I think those are both valid questions. The fact of the matter is the turnaround time has come down dramatically for the Falcon 9. It's come down from about 6 months to 27 days. And for a program that's only 2.5 years old, that's really pretty impressive to me. Yeah. And in terms of getting the cost down for reuse, I think they're well under $30 million now for a launch for their internal Starlink. They still have to build the second stage, and there's still lots of testing and stuff that's done on the Falcon 9 first stage. But that's less than $30 million for that kind of capability is again pretty remarkable, and they can probably bring that down a little bit further. That's one of the reasons why he's pushed for Starship to be fully orbital. In terms of the technology, I think it's remarkable that they've done 8 flights with these boosters and have had as few problems as they've had, because they're really pushing into unknown territory on these systems. Like, they don't have anything to really measure this against in terms of a vertical rocket launch. So there was the word on the problem you referenced, I think, which took place on February 15th, where the rocket missed the first stage, was that there was some heat damage to some part of the rocket. But they're going to discover these issues, and if you discover them on a rocket that's already flown 7 times and you get 7 or 8 flights out of it, I mean, that's great data. And you sort of learn from that, and you put it in your lessons learned pile. And they've learned about using engine cleaning fluid on the Merlin engines. They'll learn other lessons, but they're going to fly again this weekend. So it's like the fleet was down for 14 days, 15 days. I mean, that's not too long, right?
That's not too long. It's not too long. And does it look as though his Starlink bet is paying off of using his own cheap launch system to launch a system that he may be able to get muchos money out of to finance other things? I am
not a Starlink expert at all, but it just does seem to me that he's way far ahead of everyone else because no one else has the launch capability he does. The OneWeb is paying, I don't know, 40 or 50 million for a Soyuz launch where they're getting 20 or 30 satellites into space. And for them, a really good year would be like 6 to 8 launches. And SpaceX already has an operational constellation up there, and they're adding, 120 satellites a month to it. And so I think that they'll be pretty far ahead, that it'll be difficult for other players to come in the market. Maybe Bezos can afford to finance a competitive with Project Kuiper. But they may end up, the funny thing is they may end up buying launches on a Falcon 9 because New Glenn may not be ready or may not be cost effective. It certainly probably won't have the capability to get as many other satellites up as they need them. So I think Starlink has a lot of potential. And the big thing for Musk, what he did not have back in 2008 is now he can fail. He can make mistakes, and it's not existential for SpaceX. Okay, a crew mission failure could be an existential failure for the company, but beyond that, like, he can make mistakes with Starlink or Starship because not only is he one of the world's wealthiest people, he can get capital on demand. Like, there's private investors are clamoring to invest in SpaceX because they have all this growth potential and they have this great track record. So he has the resources to see these projects through. Like a few years ago, my biggest question about Starship was, can they afford to do it? And now I don't have that question anymore because he can go raise $1 billion tomorrow if he needs it.
Yeah, I mean, he can almost raise $1 billion just by tweeting.
Yeah, he could. He could say, investment round to support something, and
I know that everyone who's sort of used to your journalism will know that the book's really well written, but it's such a great story. Where can people get the book? When's it out?
It's out March 2nd, and it's available. It should be available at bookstores everywhere. I know it's going to be at Waterstones and other places in the UK. You have the UK edition. It's Amazon UK sells it. But it should be everywhere. I mean, it's
I like the fact that Jeff Bezos is selling the SpaceX book. It's good, isn't it? Is there an Audible version, by the way?
Absolutely, yeah. One of the fun things was a few months ago, the publisher sent me a list of 5 names as potential narrators. I've been an Audible customer for almost 2 decades. Love that service. So it was fun for me to pick a narrator for the book, and so it's Rob Shapiro, and that'll be out day and date with the hardcover.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm going to I'll get it on Audible as well because I'm the same. I love just listening to books in the car and while commuting. It's just I'm spend my entire day on Zoom, so the last thing I really need to do is be looking at something and on the screen or
I hear you.
anything. But so absolutely. And the great thing about Elon Musk and the 4th rocket getting through is the fact that it's made space exciting again. I mean, thank God for Elon Musk in that sense, because imagine if SpaceX didn't exist and it was still just the same boring.
The industry would be a lot less interesting. Absolutely. And it's slower. He has been an absolute forcing function on space, and it's Gwen. I had an interview with Gwen at the end of December, and she basically said that we don't. It's not our job to make other companies better, because I was saying, I was talking to her about the pace of Starship just being outrageously fast compared to anything I'd ever seen before, the space industry had seen before, and she's like, well, that's good. The space industry deserves better, or the space community deserves better, and I think she's right. I mean, they've whatever you think of Elon, his brashness or his political views or the way he conducts himself, he has unquestionably pushed space forward, years and years and years.
Yeah, I mean, he's without a doubt, I'm the most conflicted I've ever been about a single human being. I can't stand him, and I worship him in equal measure. I think he's amazing and ridiculous at the same time.
Inspiring and terrifying. That's a good way to think about him. I think.
Amazing. But yeah, that whole thing of just hammering bits of steel out in the out in Boca Chica and bunging it up in the air seems just incredible, doesn't it? Imagine seeing that even 5 years ago. It would have blown your mind. But
no, without a doubt.
Thanks very much, Eric. It's been genius as always.
Hey, I loved it, Matt. Nice talking to you again.
You're listening to the Interplanetary podcast, putting the ace back into space.
There we go.
Love it. I love him.
I've thoroughly enjoyed talking about Mars.
Me too.
And looking at Mars as well. Mars was just so beautiful in the night sky.
I know, we've really been spoiled, haven't we? Been spoiled over the last year. I mean, not with some other things over the last 12 months. But at least we could get to look at Mars.
Yeah, the kind of solar system owes us one. Do you know what I mean?
Defo.
Not that the virus came from outer space. Or did it? We could have that as the new theme. Or did it?
Or did it?
Or did it? Chris, if people have enjoyed the podcast, what should they do?
I think they should go to interplanetary.org.uk.
That's a very good start.
It is.
And also like and subscribe on their podcast aggregator.
Yes, that would be lovely.
That would be nice too. That'd be very, very nice.
Delicious.
And if you want to go one step further and join the fantastic people here on Discord, which is the Spodcats, the true Spodcats.
We love you, Spodcats.
Although you're all Spodcats. But the true Spodcats. You could go to patreon.com/interplanetary. Or just follow the links from the website. There's always lots of pictures and bloggy stuff on the website too. So if you missed something, all the info is on the website.
Premium content.
And so links, premium content, absolutely premium content. So, Chris, what are you doing? What are you doing this week?
This week I am teaching my ass off. So I'm going to be working every day teaching on Teams or Zoom or anything like that. But on Friday is quite interesting because I'm going to be doing poetry workshops with children, and the subject they have chosen is perseverance. So we're going to be writing some poems about perseverance. So maybe we could get a chance to read one of them. What one of the classes do.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, definitely do that.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome. That can be their prize.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell them. I'll tell them that's what we'll do, and I'm sure they'll get very excited.
Read out on the
we'll have to make sure we
Interplanetary podcast.
We have to watch our language on that particular episode, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I should mention that this last couple of weeks we went over 500,000 downloads. So
amazing.
That was a very, very marvelous moment in
the Sky
in
at
my
Night
life.
effect.
And the Sky at Night magazine have put us as top pick. That's absolutely. I'm having a wonderful time.
Yes, you are. And what are you up to this week?
Up this week, I shall be teaching my Mars off.
I like what you did there.
Unfortunately, I shall be. It's exam week this week, so I've got to sort of. But then it's half term, so I'm going to try and do something special and get on top of things.
Yeah, do it, man. Get out there.
Yeah, try and get on top of things. We've got some good interviews coming up, including with a space lawyer as well.
Oh, exciting!
So that's going to be fun. Yeah. So I think that's it. We've got a nice long podcast there.
Lovely.
So I'm going to say bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Spot.
Bye, Spots. Bye, Spots. Bye, Spots. Bye, Spots. Bye, Spots. Bye, Spots. Bye, Spots.